Let's get started here. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the first Budget Sub 3 meeting. That's helpful. I'd like to welcome you all to the first Budget Sub 3 meeting of the new session and ask that we establish a quorum, please.
Bloom.
Here.
Campos. Gordon.
Here.
Logue. Patterson.
Here. Let me first state that there, in the file notice, there was to be a hearing regarding Cal EPA. We were going to be hearing from Secretary Rodriguez. That has been scheduled, or that is going to be rescheduled to a future date. So if any of you are here for that, I'm suspecting none of you were, now you know. That'll be on another date. Well, I would like to begin this morning's hearing with a brief statement, and as you can see, I brought a prop with me because it's not lost on me that we're here to discuss our drought at a time when we are perhaps fortuitously experiencing our first significant rainstorm in quite some time. It's not going to solve our problems. At least what's predicted to fall over the next couple of days is not going to solve our problems, and it is no secret to anyone who's here or anyone who's paying even remote attention to things that are happening in California that we are experiencing one of our worst droughts since we began keeping records of these things nearly 150 years ago. Since July 1st, San Francisco has received just 5.85 inches of rain, and to put that in context, that's only 35% of the norm. LA has received only 1.2 inches during that same period of time, and that's less than 10% of our normal down in Southern California. The Sierra snowpack was a frightening 12% of normal in late January, and things haven't gotten much better. It's now 23% of normal with the snowfall that happened in the last few weeks. But at that level, we are still in very, very dangerous territory, and absent significant rainfall and snowfall over the next few months, these numbers mean that we have no choice but to make significant and immediate lifestyle changes and ultimately perhaps cultural changes if this continues. It's a sobering fact that as we sit here today, some rural communities may run out of water supplies, go to zero. And there's about 10 communities that fall within this category within the next 60 days. And as we go outward from 60 days, if things don't change, then more and more communities will fall into that category of simply having no water. The Santa Clara Valley Water District that allocates the water for both Assembly members Campos and Gordon's districts has asked the public to cut water usage by 20%. For them, this is the biggest reduction in the last 20 years. Other agencies are soon going to follow. Everybody in the state is looking at this issue and must look at this issue. So for those of us in more urban areas like myself, this means banning landscape, or it might mean banning landscape or lawn watering. It could mean mandatory water rationing, no filling of swimming pools, washing cars, and higher water rates with fines for excessive use. For our more rural areas and the center for California's $45 billion agriculture industry, this could mean that the current 500,000 acres of farmland that currently, right now, sit fallow could more double in size as early as next year. Cattle ranchers who in normal years can let their cattle graze for free are now paying $1,200 a day to provide hay as feed. And these ranchers may have to sell their entire herd because they just can't keep up with these expenses, and that might lead to them going out of business. This in turn will translate to high unemployment rates for farm workers and others who work in the agriculture industry, and that in turn will lead to increased demand on our social services in the state. So we're just really touching the surface here in terms of the ripple effect and the economic impact that this drought could have on the state, and that's not to mention the social impact that it'll have on real lives. In short, the declaration of a drought by the governor is not unlike a disaster declaration. The only difference here is that when an earthquake hits, or when there's a hurricane, or another natural disaster of that nature, the damage happens very quickly. Drought's different. Drought happens over a long period of time. But that makes it no less urgent, and we must respect that urgency here today. Our administration is presenting here today an urgency drought relief package, and this is just a first step to address some of our needs. By no means does this solve our problem, nor is this the last discussion or action we will have to take. In fact, Assemblymember Anthony Rendon, who's chair of the Water, Parks, and Wildlife Committee, has been working on drought issues for many months and is planning a groundwater hearing in early March. And this committee will also be having an additional drought hearing on March 19th, and will do more as necessary. I know that the Senate will be hard at work, and that the governor, who we need to remember was governor when we experienced the last significant drought in 1976 and 77, is going to take this issue very, very seriously. But the drought relief package before us today is an important step in getting dollars out of the door now to help communities deal with the devastating dry conditions and to increase our local water supplies. I would like, as the administration begins to address us here today, ask that during the presentation the following questions be responded to, and these are things that have been percolating around these halls and outside of the Capitol and in the press, and I think they're important questions for the administration to answer for us. What would you say to those who question whether this package will really address urgent drought issues and drought needs? There is some doubt expressed by some. For example, how is the administration responding to those communities that are in immediate danger of running out of water, those that I referenced earlier? Can you speak to the significant actions included in the package and what real and immediate impact they will have? And also, without knowing when this drought will end, what does the package contain that will better manage our water supply in the long term, something we really need to be thinking about? And before the administration makes their presentation this morning, I would like to provide an opportunity for the other members to make an opening statement. Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I too have some fundamental questions with respect to what this actually does and with respect to how it's paid for, and also some concerns with respect to what looks to be some fees that are going to be put on top of farmers already in the middle of paying for a huge consequence of the drought, and also the question with respect to the appropriateness of using cap and trade for what I think ought to be a general fund purpose. And also there's some significant water rights issues that are buried in one of these that I've got to take a good hard look at as well. So I'll be listening for those kinds of that kind of information. We'll have some questions, and then we'll go from there. I appreciate the chance to lay that on the table.
Thank you. Mr. Gordon? All right, then we'll proceed with our hearing. Welcome, Ms. Bosler. It's good to see you this morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Keely Bosler with the Department of Finance, and it's my pleasure to be here to walk through AB 79 and AB 80 that have been put together over the past month to really address the unprecedented drought that we're in, and also the state of emergency that was issued by the governor on January 17th of this year. I won't go through a lot of the statistics that the chair already eloquently outlined, but the state is in having record dry conditions. 2014, earlier this year, was projected to be the driest year on record. And water supplies have dipped to very low levels. Snowpack, as you stated, is only around 20% of normal. Many of the state's reservoirs are at very low levels. And while we hope the rain and snow this week is plentiful, it would have to rain and snow very frequently between now and May for us to even be at an average level. And this is really due to the fact that this is not our first dry year. We're coming off of 2 very dry years. And it's really that cumulative impact that's brought us to this crisis that is before us. And as the chair stated, there are conditions present in certain areas of the state where the problem is already very urgent, and drinking water systems are at risk, and also very difficult decisions up and down the state in the agricultural sector, making difficult decisions to fallow land, because the water just simply is not available. Also, obviously, the impacts of on the agricultural industry will ripple through communities and have a significant human impact as well. So these bills are really set a first step to address some of these issues in the short term and the long term. Just a little bit about what the administration has been doing recently. The governor has formed a drought task force. This is made up of many of our state departments and agencies who are all coming together daily, weekly, to coordinate the state's drought response and to take actions as a state to work and tear down the different barriers that may exist between different departments to really work together and solve problems and address the issues that have been arisen because of the drought. To date, we've convened many public forums around the state to understand better the drought impacts and the drought needs of the agricultural sector, and also of those communities and the important community organizations that are out in the field, including food banks, that are going to be really key to our response to the drought. And there's been many other actions related to the operations of our state's water systems that are really daily work that's occurring. A little bit about the bills before you. The bills do appropriate $687.4 million, and again, this is a multi-pronged effort. There are funds that are going to provide immediate relief. $15 million general fund specifically related to emergency drinking water. These monies will be available to be deployed immediately to go out and address localized situations where drinking water is at risk because of the drought. Also, $1 million is being put forward to really ramp up our Save Our Water campaign, which I think is very important for us getting the word out about how all Californians can do their part to reduce water usage by 20%. And that's a really important aspect of this, because I think that the bad thing about a drought is that it's sunny and you're feeling good usually, but at the same time, there are very significant impacts that are happening to the state. There's also $46 million for food and rental assistance that will also be deployed as we start to see the real impacts of the drought on communities. We also have in this package more midterm and long-term actions, and I think that's important because some of them are immediate, but some of them are not going to be creating a water supply, immediately. But they're really important, I think, to get going now, because some of these things do take time and have been in the works for years. There's $549 million bond funds for projects to improve self-reliance of regional water systems and other multi-benefit water projects. There's also $40 million from the cap and trade funds for projects to improve water use efficiency and also, obviously, importantly, save energy. There's also a $13 million investment in our conservation corps to really promote water use efficiency again and ensure that veterans and formerly incarcerated youth have opportunities to be trained, provide important job training opportunities in the area of water use efficient landscaping and other efforts. There's also $14 million for efforts to improve groundwater management and provide assistance for communities where the drought has just exacerbated existing groundwater contamination issues. Finally, there's $2.5 million to ensure that our existing water rights are enforced. The bill does make specific increases in penalties and fines only in times of emergencies such as this, and it also streamlines the authority of the State Water Board to enforce existing water right laws and increases penalties for illegal water diversions. And it really also provides the Water Board with the ability to adopt emergency drought regulations. And I just want to stress these additional penalties and fines are only in place during emergencies such as this. And there are no changes to proposed to underlying water rights laws. I'll just end with saying that this is a first step. We look forward to continued discussions throughout the budget process this year about additional steps that we may be taking to address the drought. And obviously, we continue as an administration to monitor and work on this issue every day. And as the situation progresses and there are additional things that we need to come back to the legislature for, we will be doing that. So again, yes, this is a first step, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I have my colleague Matt Almy here also to help answer any questions.
Thank you. Well, let me begin with one question regarding the 10 communities that I referenced and that the administration has been speaking about that will likely be losing their water supply within the next 60 days or so. What plans are being made to directly assist those communities in that crisis?
Yes, we're monitoring those situations daily, and actually just recently up in Willits, which is in Mendocino County, there was a community that was very close to losing their water supply. And there was a multi-pronged effort to put together the resources to build an additional pipeline in order to tap into a neighboring water source. And so it's those kinds of strike forces that are going to be going into communities and really looking at all of the needs and all of the barriers to getting the projects needed that are needed to ensure a reliable water supply. Getting that done, and really that $15 million of emergency drinking water monies are really meant to be able to quickly deploy where we see immediate situations.
Thank you. And you correctly, I think, observed that this is only a first step here this morning with reviewing a series of measures that will be heard on the legislative floors tomorrow. What kinds of steps is the administration contemplating as next steps?
Well, we're still having lots of discussions about those. I mean, we are meeting as a large drought task force every week to discuss what we're seeing out in the field. So those ideas are all being collated. We're also at the Department of Finance in the middle of our budget preparation for the May revision and the April letters. So during that process, we're also reviewing additional actions that we may take to address the situation. And I think, I think we have to stay flexible, obviously. That's why we have such an emphasis on really getting out into the communities and understanding what's going on at the ground level, because we need to be able to react to what we're seeing. And I think this package collectively is that first step in addressing what we have been seeing and what we're anticipating. But we're going to need to continue to adjust, and I think that's still in development. Is the short answer.
Thank you. And I think that the administration and the legislative leadership has done a good job in the past few weeks in heightening awareness around this issue, and I want to thank you for that. Are there plans going forward for there being an effort to regularly report to the people of California about the status of this issue and make sure that, pardon me, that it remains front and center in people's minds?
I think that's really what's behind the additional resources for the Save Our Water campaign, because I do think it's very important that the message about the seriousness of this situation is really put into people's consciousness about how they go about their daily lives and the decisions that they make with their own personal water use. So I think that the education effort is going to be ongoing. We're definitely looking for ways to promote and ensure that the message reaches all Californians, because that's, I think, at the heart of a very important response that we can take.
Thank you. Members, are there questions? Mr. Gordon? No? Mr. Patterson? Right. Are there members of the public who would like to be heard? Yeah, please step forward to the microphone. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Kathy Cole with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. Certainly, strategic funding of drought relief programs can lessen the impacts, and this proposal is a very important step towards providing that assistance. Expediting the flow of funding and removing regulatory barriers to relief efforts are important tools for the governor and the legislature, and we urge your positive consideration of this measure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Randy Knott with the City of Sacramento. We want to thank the administration for this very thoughtful legislation. We're seriously at ground zero here in the Sacramento region. We support the legislation. We do have some concern, however, at the way that the Department of Water Resources would be giving out the money under the IRWM. And there's, without some nuanced pardon me, language to the legislation, we get concerned that a number of the projects would not be drought related. And our biggest concern is our ability to ensure, at a minimum, health and safety water, and certainly what helps our agricultural climate up here. So we'd like the opportunity to consider some additional direction to DWR to ensure that these are drought-related projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Take your time.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Wendy Ritterbush with the Association of California Water Agencies. We don't have a position on either of these pieces of legislation. As you know, these budget trailer bills, I think, have only been in print a little over 24 hours, so we are soliciting feedback from our member agencies. And we will make sure that we forward those on to you. We did want to let you know our association does represent over 430 water districts, community service districts, and cities within California. So our members are delivering about 90% of the developed water in California. We've been working really closely with other local, state, and federal agencies on the drought, and we have a really comprehensive website at aqua.com that we invite folks to visit. It has a list of resources, including an interactive map. It outlines the actions our agencies are taking to address these unprecedented dry conditions. And the one thing that we know that we do support in this legislation is our successful partnership with Department of Water Resources on Save Our Water, and we continue to work with them on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. David Rabbit, Sonoma County Board of Supervisors, as well as the Director of the Sonoma County Water Agency. Two of the cities that you mentioned earlier, although not served by the Water Agency, are located in Sonoma County, Healdsburg and Cloverdale. We're at the front line of these issues. We support wholeheartedly the administration's bills going forward. We do think that there are short-term needs, there are long-term needs, and we think there's a great balance in these bills to address those issues, so we are fully supportive, and thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Pablo Garza with the Nature Conservancy. Just want to state our support for this proposal. We think it's a balanced approach and urgently needed. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Noé Paramo, California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. I'm also a resident of Modesto, Stanislaus County. Last week I was in Fresno for the informational meeting, also the bond hearing, and see how the effect has been on the disadvantaged communities, farmworker communities, has been tremendous, has been a challenge. So the most marginalized, disadvantaged communities, we look to see that support and relief is provided during this climate, whether it's short-term, long-term, because this is going to be going on for quite a while, as we understand. So we look for you to support this measure and make sure that the resources and services get to the most needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other individuals who would like to be heard? All right. Well, Ms. Campos, as irony would have it, is stuck in traffic, which I have no doubt is because of the rain. But I think what I'll do is entertain a motion to conceptually approve the plan that we've heard today, and then we'll hold the vote open so that anyone who wants to vote will be able to vote on the plan. Yes, Mr. Patterson?
You're making a motion.
Sorry?
You're making a motion to approve as
well, I'm entertaining a motion. I prefer if someone else
I'll make the motion to conceptually approve the plan as presented.
I'll second that.
Could I have the floor just for a minute?
Of course.
And address this, but also...
yes. We'll ask you to speak to the motion.
I'll speak to them. Well, what I would like to ask the committee to do is to consider an alternative motion that I'd like to make. But I wanted to just sort of set the stage with respect to the details. On February 24th, Republicans sent to the governor a letter of concern with respect to the matters I want to touch on just briefly. Are you familiar with the contents of that letter, particularly with respect to the concerns with respect to water rights and essentially the ongoing reach of the water board, even perhaps when the drought is over? There is a concern about some overreach and some water rights issues.
I am familiar with the letter, and I think that it's important that there were other bills referenced in the letter that had been defeated in prior years. And I think it's important to make a distinction about how this proposal is different. These are powers, new powers for the Water Board that are only to be in place during times of emergency, such as this. And I think in prior iterations, they were increased penalties all the time. So I think this is a more nuanced and more directed response because I think we understand there are concerns about that.
With respect to that, does the emergency powers to the Water Board in the bills in front of us allow the Water Board, independent of any other agency or government or elected leadership, declare the emergency and actualize the powers?
If I can, Member Patterson, my name is Michael Lawfer, Chief Counsel for the State Water Resources Control Board. The legislation that's before the committee has a uniform definition for drought that triggers the powers. It builds off an existing definition that's in the Water Code that's based on whether or not the current year is a critically dry year preceded by two, present law says, dry or critically dry years. This would add a below normal category to that, which these are recognized definitions within the water quality control plans established by the Water Board, and they appear in the Water Code presently. So this would provide additional flexibility, plus the addition, because this year was so unusual, we have one of our driest years ever, but it didn't trigger the powers of the board that the legislature had already provided to it. And so the legislation includes additional flexibility for the governor. There is no separate ability for the Water Board to trigger the emergency powers.
So the governor would have to trigger the emergency powers?
It would either be, if it meets the definition of critically dry year, which is, again, an existing Water Code referencing to a water quality control plan established by the Water Board, and it was preceded by two consecutive below normal dry, or critically dry years. All of those are established definitions. So those could independently trigger it. And the water rights community knows those. Those are established, and we all understand what that means. The new nuance in this legislation, besides adding below normal years to trigger that, is that a governor's declaration of a drought emergency could also enable some of these powers. And that just recognizes our hydrology. We can look back 100 years and see what's gone on in California, but we can have an unusual confluence of events that may create the worst drought in history, and yet it wouldn't trigger under the prior law.
So, Counselor, the answer to my question is yes.
The answer is...
It does automatically trigger the powers expressed here with respect to what the bills will do, but also with respect to the water rights question.
The answer is no. The Water Board doesn't have the authority to, under existing law or under the proposed legislation, to trigger it.
Okay, but, am I correct that the emergency regulation adopted by the board may be renewed if the board determines that emergency drought conditions are still in effect? This is a board decision.
And that decision is based off the enumerated provisions in the statute. For example, if the governor's declaration is still in place, or if it is still a critically dry year following 2 consecutive below normal dry or critically dry years. So the board's discretion is constrained earlier, and it just needs to be renewed if it can make that finding again.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Just a further follow-up with respect to the greenhouse gas usage. I really need some help with this one. We have, by regulation and by law, we have required the fund to be grown essentially by regulation and fee and essential taxation on a certain part of the California enterprises with respect to their energy. It becomes a fund with specific responsibility for a particular goal. And it just seems to me that this is a serious drought. It is statewide, and the better source for funds, all things considered here, is the general fund. And in a time of some surpluses, I would be more comfortable with seeing a funding stream that is general rather than taking from some and giving to others. And I just want to just extend it one more point. And I think we'll hear more about this with others who are concerned about this. This is beginning to look more and more like an executive slush fund, a use of this money for things that are either tangentially connected or outright beyond the pale of the use of those funds. And so I recognize the emergency. I think we do have resources apart from tapping cap and trade. But would you help me understand if there is a nexus, and what is that nexus?
Yeah, Matt Alme, Department of Finance. The use of cap and trade funds, there's provisional language in the emergency legislation that directs $40 million for essentially water use efficiency projects. And it is consistent with furthering the purpose of AB 32 because it requires that the funds be used for projects that result in greenhouse gas emission reductions. And so it is true that there are certain projects that you could consider multi-purpose and achieve co-benefits. That is to say, simultaneously you're saving water, and you can also simultaneously reduce energy use, thereby reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So that's the nexus. Let me give you an example. A particular water conservation project in Southern California would save water, but because a lot of the water gets pumped up north, it requires a lot of energy to pump that water down to the south. So to the extent that you're saving water in Southern California, you're also simultaneously reducing the amount of energy used to pump that water, thereby reducing greenhouse gas emission
But even
reductions.
if the pumping practices are generally considered, some of it has already been mitigated at the pump end. So I'm curious about how that.
Right.
If you've got the best efficiency you can possibly get in the pumping, how is that a serious, quantifiable reduction in greenhouse gas?
Well, by pumping less. Even if you have an efficient pump, if you require less water to pump, then that would result in a reduced energy use. And just to ensure appropriate belts and suspenders, so to speak, are on these funds, there is requirements in this legislation that the legislature be notified that all of the projects that there become essentially a record that we will notify the legislature on about how these funds will not only reduce water use but also reduce energy use to result in greenhouse gas emission reductions, thereby furthering the purpose of AB 32, which is what the purpose of the fund is.
Thank you. One little thought. Yes. Has the legislative analyst been able to weigh in on the policy and funding implications of what's before us?
I don't believe that there's a specific recommendation, but Department of
I don't want to speak entirely on behalf of the LAO, but they did release.
We don't want you to do that either.
But they did release the report on the governor's budget cap and trade expenditure plan, and there was one aspect of our governor's budget plan that included water use efficiency in DWR. I think their primary concern was the use of metrics. Not that it was an inappropriate use, but that there should be more metrics.
Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like LAO, are you okay?
Happy to comment if you'd like us to.
No, I think that's all right. Thank you.
Well,
Mr. Gordon.
Let me just, I promise I will conclude. I would like to see LAO specifically, right? But I know time is of the essence, and this is an emergency. And in that spirit, I would like, in the rush to do it and to do it now, I think we need to be careful not to do it recklessly. And I would like to offer, in the interest of the matters I brought before the committee, and we'll bring forward on the floor tomorrow, an alternative conceptual motion, and I'd like to make that, and let's see if it gets a second.
All right, that'll be a substitute motion.
Then I'll do a substitute. I'd like to move that we approve the draft package, but with some amendments. One is to delete the $30 million greenhouse gas reduction fund to the Department of Water Resources, to delete the $10 million greenhouse gas reduction fund to the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and to replace these with $40 million in general fund expenditures. And to make that motion, hoping that we do in fact understand that the general fund is for general fund purposes and does not carry with it the kind of nexus testing and concerns that I think others would be raising. And then finally, fourth, I'd like to delete section 1014 of SB 104, which allows the Water Board to curtail legal water rights, expand regulatory enforcement powers and fines, and renew emergency regulations if the board determines that emergency drought conditions are still in effect. With that, I'd like to make that as a substitute motion.
Thank you. That motion fails for lack of a second.
Appreciate the effort.
Yes. Mr. Gordon.
Yeah, I want to comment on why I would not be comfortable seconding that motion. That substitute motion, and that is that I actually agree with my colleague that cap and trade money, we need to have a far better definition and I'm hopeful that in hearings further here with this committee and elsewhere that we'll begin to develop a plan that really clarifies how we're going to use cap and trade, so that it is not something that we, pick and choose, and but that rather there is a consistent, solid nexus to the activities that we use the cap and trade dollars for. I'm actually convinced that there is a nexus relative to this proposal and the water, particularly as it relates to the water use efficiency. And knowing the amount of energy that it takes to move water, if we are able to more efficiently use and move water in the state of California, I think we will have an impact on energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm comfortable with this one. I do want, and I'm willing to move forward on this without a more comprehensive plan because of the emergency that we face. But I do hope that in the future we'll look at cap and trade and develop a comprehensive proposal and plan for how we use those dollars. So I'm comfortable with this, and I'm also comfortable with the issues that were raised around water rights, because I think that the power of the state board is restricted relative to the requirements in legislation and law, the requirement of the governor to declare a drought emergency, and only within those parameters does the board have some limited powers that I think may be necessary at times. So for those reasons, I can't second the motion that was offered as a substitute. I do hope that as this moves forward and we have our debate tomorrow on the Assembly floor on these issues, that we're able to move this package forward, because time is of the essence. Communities across the state of California are in dire straits and in situations that are getting only worse by the day. And even if we were to have to build an ark with 40 days and 40 nights of rain, it probably still wouldn't be enough to get us out of the problem we face at the moment in California. So we need to move forward. I think these are good proposals to move us forward, and I'm happy to support them.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Let me just add a couple of brief comments. First, with respect to the topic of cap and trade. I agree very much with Mr. Gordon's comments on that topic, and I want to thank the administration for incorporating the 30-day notification process. We are getting out just a little bit ahead of the cap and trade issue. It is the goal of this committee to actually address that issue in the committee hearing process the budget process as we move forward this session. But we're just beginning now. Because we have this emergency, because we need to deal with it now, the administration, quite appropriately, I think, has looked at the various resources excuse me, that we have available. Cap and trade funds are one of those resources, but it does need to be tied to criteria. The notification process will allow the administration to notify this committee and the legislature precisely what the nexus is in the administration's opinion, and we will have the opportunity to respond if we feel differently, and hopefully then work out any differences that might exist. But like Mr. Gordon, I've taken a look at what the administration is proposing here, and it's my expectation that the nexus test will be met, and that we will be able to find that this is an appropriate use. The administration, Department of Finance, called this belts and suspenders, and I think that's exactly what it is, and it should give a good degree of comfort to those folks out in the community who are paying close attention to the allocation of cap and trade funds, that we are providing the appropriate amount of oversight even in the face of this extreme crisis that we're facing. And so when I heard the term reckless used early in the hearing. I have to defer from that. I think that the process that's being followed here is anything other than reckless. In fact, it's very carefully thought out. Again, I think everyone on this dais has mentioned that this is an emergency, that we do need to move forward quickly in order to address this very, very real crisis. When it comes to the issue of enforcement, I am quite certain that as this crisis continues, assuming it does continue, that we are going to see stepped-up enforcement efforts across the state, across the board, in every sector, whether it is urban residential and in an urban residential context or in agriculture. It is a fact of life, if we are going to get a handle on water usage in our state, that we are going to have to be better about enforcing, not just adopting new measures, but also enforcing appropriately those measures that we currently have in effect. And I would like to point out that the new laws, as with existing laws, require our State Water Resource Control Board to take into account all relevant, when they're doing enforcement, to take into consideration all relevant circumstances, including but not limited to the extent of harm caused by the violation, the nature and persistence of the violation, the length of time over which a violation occurs, and corrective action that has been taken, if any, by an alleged violator. So there are other protections built into the law currently as well. So I want to try and reassure folks that we're not in the Wild West here, where we're going to be seeing unfettered enforcement without any thought or any due process. We'll certainly be paying attention to that, and if there are allegations of that happening, that is something that should be addressed by the legislature and by the administration as well. Mr. Gordon?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one other comment on behalf of our colleague, Ms. Campos. I note that she is on her way, but as we may be wrapping up here shortly.
Very shortly.
I know in a previous conversation with her, I know one of her concerns had been the language in here about the emergency food and housing assistance, and concern that making sure that as we move forward with this, and I think there's room in the legislation to look at that, that particularly those in our farming communities, those who are our agricultural workers who may be very severely impacted, that assistance reaches them as needed and as appropriate. And so on her behalf, I would put that marker into this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. And if there are no additional comments, we will move to a vote.
Bloom.
Aye.
Campos. Gordon.
Aye.
Logue. Patterson.
We will hold this item open. I think Ms. Campos will be here hopefully shortly, and I thank you all for your participation. Thank you very much.